Imagine the year is 1896 and you are the wife of a proud warrior chief in West Africa. The French tricolour has been planted on your soil. You stand amidst the smoke, the battle lost, your husband's fate sealed hours ago. But the gaze of the arriving colonial official is not one of a conqueror, but of an accountant. You brace for the quick end, but the end never comes. What follows is not the chaos of war, but the cold, methodical process of the French administration. For 6 centuries, this system perfected one dark principle. Death offers release. Policy offers only a prolonged, documented annihilation of identity. Your husband's death was a battle ended. Your survival is a sentence that begins now. This was the colonial policy of the human harvest. The history books celebrate the French Republic. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. They teach us about the Code Civil, the blueprint for modern law. Yet, buried deep in the colonial archives of Dakar and the financial records of the Ministère des Colonies in Paris lies the Code of Conquest. This was not the uncontrolled violence of frustrated soldiers. This was colonial bureaucracy implemented with chilling precision. Every step, from the separation of families to the assignment of new identities, was codified in official decrees that treated human beings as a quantifiable resource. This was a system that replaced moral code with a profit ledger. The records survive. They prove that systematic exploitation was not an accident of history. It was a foundational economic policy. The moment the colonial power achieved victory, the processing protocol began. It started with separation. Adults were instantly segregated by gender and then meticulously categorized by age, physical capacity, and perceived reproductive value. This wasn't chaos. This was an inventory assessment. Official French reports from the time detail the value assessment of the captured. Women past reproductive age were often relegated to manual labor or simply left to starve. The young and healthy were immediately marked as high-value human capital, their names replaced with a registry number. They became inventory items in a civil registry that operated with zero human empathy. This initial sort was a psychological shockwave. Families were forced to witness their loved ones being reduced to a numerical designation, erasing their history before their very eyes. The French colonial project understood that an individual with a name, land, and culture is a revolutionary. An individual with only a number is a compliant laborer. The system therefore sought the total annihilation of identity because it increased their economic yield. Their local language became forbidden. Their traditional clothing was seized and replaced with drab, uniform material. Official documents mandated a change of name, often to a generic French one, ensuring that any record of their past life was legally voided. The goal was to create a human asset that was zeroed out. No history, no family ties, and thus no resistance. The colonial administration calculated the cost of this psychological torture and found it cheaper than maintaining a large military garrison. Fear and erasure were the most cost-effective tools of governance. The system's cruelty reached its administrative peak with the children allocation policy. Children were routinely separated from their mothers at a young age, often before they could even speak. This wasn't just to punish the mother. It was to secure the next generation of colonial servants. The children were placed into state-run institutions where they were strictly forbidden from learning their native language or traditions. They were educated solely in French history and culture, ensuring they grew up loyal to the colonial banner that had destroyed their mother's life. The colonial state became the surrogate authoritative parent. The surviving documents detail the mother's reactions, not as grief, but as a management challenge, recording attempts to escape or communicate as insubordination rather than despair. The policy worked to ensure that the colonial power had no future opposition. The captured women were funneled into the French colonial economy's most demanding sectors: rubber plantations, cotton fields, and domestic service for colonial officers. Their labor was mandated by local decrees, essentially converting them into state property whose freedom was suspended indefinitely. Colonial records detail the hours, the meager rations and the expected yield, all calculated to the penny. The women were often given just enough food to maintain the energy for labor, but never enough to maintain health. Their entire existence was reduced to an input-output equation for the colonial export market. The system created a terrifying paradox. They were alive, but their lives were now governed by the monetary value of their suffering. Their existence was worse than death because it was a continuous economic process for their captors. The most chilling documentation lies within the local colonial legal codes. These were not violations of the law. They were the law. Procedures that were clearly abusive were codified as necessary measures for public order and colonial security. These codes formalized the concept of permanent subject status, stripping them of basic legal rights, including the right to own property or testify against a French national. Their subjugation was not random violence. It was legal doctrine maintained by magistrates and judges. The administration understood that to maintain control, the cruelty had to be legitimate. By creating laws that justified the abuse, they normalized the unthinkable within the structure of the civilized republic. The colonial process was designed to extinguish the possibility of rescue. Settlements were often shown fabricated documents or told false stories of their home villages being completely purged, eliminating the hope of a return or rebellion. Those who attempted escape or revolt faced the system of the correctional assignment, a transfer to a location or labor camp notorious for its harshness. These assignments were tracked in the central administration's records, acting as a statistical deterrent for the rest of the population. The French administration excelled at mental warfare. They learned that a person who has lost all hope, who believes their past is dead and their future is sealed, is a person who requires the least physical restraint. The colonial empire eventually fell, but the scars of the policy remain. These administrative procedures did not just break individuals, they shattered the social fabric and generational memory of entire regions. The fear of that original harvest remains woven into the culture. We examine these records today not to dwell on individual atrocities, but to understand the terrifying potential of state bureaucracy. When an administration treats human beings as expendable units of cost and replaces empathy with efficiency, it creates a system of systematic horror. The archive's final lesson is that the ultimate form of conquest is not killing the enemy, but capturing their identity. The wives of those defeated warriors survived, forced to bear witness to the methodical erasure of their own souls. This calculated suffering, documented in dusty French ledgers, confirms that some systems can indeed create an existence where death would have been the preferred and cruelly denied mercy.